Hey everyone, this is our first lesson in our word parts unit. So we're going to be talking about context clues, word parts, how to break down a word, and really what that means is we're going to be working on trying to figure out what a word means based off of all of the clues that we're given. So our lesson today focus is on word parts or parts of the word that help us to understand what a big word actually means. So today, make sure you have a pen or pencil. Make sure you have paper and notebook wherever you've been taking your notes. And you also want to make sure you have your vocabulary tracker because we're going to be adding some vocabulary words to that sheet. So the reason that we are focusing on this skill is because this is one of our major GED skills for our reading test. We need to be able to determine what the meaning of a word is. So we're determining the meanings of words and phrases as they are used inside of a text. And that includes determining connotative and figurative meanings from context. So we're going to be working with these words, connotative and figurative meanings from context. We're going to be working on that a little bit later. Today, we're going to focus on the first half of this sentence where it asks us to determine the word meaning of phrases. So in order to do that, by the end of our lesson, we are going to be able to identify different pieces of a word. We are going to be able to break down a word into its pieces. And we're going to be able to find the meaning of a big word using those word pieces. So let's go ahead and get started. So what we're going to be working with today are three parts: the root word, the prefix, and the suffix. So we're going to be working with all of these different clues to help us gain understanding. So I want you to take a peek at this camera here. We know that cameras operate really by just looking through the lens, clicking on the button, and seeing the image reflected for you. But what we don't realize is that cameras are actually made up of a whole bunch of teeny tiny parts, and that these parts all work together in order for us to be able to click that one button and see the image reflected back at us. Big words work the same way. All words are made up of different pieces of other words. So what we say is that all words are made up of root words, prefixes, and suffixes. So when we work on becoming familiar with those root words, prefix, and suffixes, we can use that as a way to discover the meaning of a word that we may not know. The other thing we want to keep in mind is that all big words are made up of smaller words. In English, words are created based off of Latin, Greek, and French root words, and we add different prefixes and suffixes to those words to create a bigger word. So we can look at a word like solarterraneous, which sounds like a big word when you say it, and we can look at that and say, oh, I recognize parts of that word. I recognize that sol sounds a lot like solar, so those two things probably go together. And I recognize that terraneous sounds a lot like terrain, which is really the earth. It's how things are constructed on the earth. So when I see solar terraneous, I'm seeing, well, this is probably how the sun and the earth are working together to do something. So when we look at these big words, we want to remember that all of these small words, when we put them together, they create these big words. So we don't want to be intimidated when we see a big word. We just want to say to ourselves, how can I make this something that I understand? How can I break this into things that make sense to me? And really, the way to do this is by identifying our root words, prefixes, and suffixes. So that's what we're going to practice. The first thing that we're going to look at are root words. Now, root words are also called base words. So on your vocabulary sheet, this is the first vocabulary word for our lesson, is our base or root words. Before I give you that definition, I want you to think a minute about a tree. So I've got this really cool picture of a tree with its roots here. I want you to think to yourself, what does a root do? Why do plants need roots? When I think about a root, I think about the thing that holds up a plant, the thing that the plant grows out from. It anchors the plant. And without a root, that plant isn't going to grow. Words work the same way. When we talk about a base word, these are the main parts of our word. They can stand alone, or they can have prefixes or suffixes attached to them. On your vocabulary sheet, we're going to use this first sentence as our definition about what a base word is. A base word is the main part of that word. And just like the roots on a tree, it's the part of the word that holds your core meaning. It's the part that can grow by adding on a prefix or a suffix. And really, it's the part that tells us what that word is really all about. Somewhere on your note sheet, we also want to include that base words are also called root words. These two things mean the same thing. And sometimes when you hear me talk about them, sometimes I'll say base words and sometimes I'll say root words. It just kind of depends on what I am talking about. They're interchangeable and they both mean the same thing. So let's see how this works. Let's take a word like comfort. What does comfort mean? Well, to me, comfort means feeling calm and relaxed. It means feeling at ease where I am at. What happens if I add a little bit to that word? So for example, comfortable. I have added on the end A-B-L-E. Well, how does that change the word? I know comfortable still has the base of comfort, so it still has that idea of being at ease. When I think of able, it means having the ability to do something. So comfortable literally means having the ability to be or show comfort. So our beds should be comfortable. Couches and chairs should be comfortable. They should be showing the comfort. They should have the ability to be comfort. And that's kind of what we look at there. Well, what happens if we add more to it? In this part, I've added UN to the front of our word. So now our word is uncomfortable. Well, I know that when I add UN to the front of something, it means not. So it means not having the ability to be comfortable or to show comfort. So uncomfortable here changes, or the UN, changes the way I view that word. And what we notice is that between all of these words, when I go from comfort to comfortable to uncomfortable, my base word has stayed the same. My base word is still comfort. I'm just attaching pieces to the front and back of it to make sense. And that's really how base words work, is we use them as a way to build. Now, another cool thing to remember is that many of the words that we use every day have Greek or Latin roots. So if you are not a native English speaker, you may think to yourself, well, how am I going to figure out what these words mean? If you speak a language that also includes Greek or Latin roots, you will also recognize that there are some similarities. So for example, French and Spanish use a lot of Latin roots. So what I always recommend is that if you recognize something from your native language that also uses Greek and Latin roots, then chances are that word means the same thing or something similar to what it means in your native language. Not all the time and not with every language. It really depends on whether or not the language that you speak uses Greek or Latin root words. And that's something that we can work on together if that is something you need more practice with. All right, so let's keep going here. The next thing we want to look at is prefixes. So I really like this picture here of all these Legos because when we build big words, it's just like building Legos. We take one small piece of something. So for example, if I took this little yellow brick right here and I attached it to this little blue brick, I've created something new. And that's really how prefixes work. Prefixes and suffixes are also known as affixes or affixes, depending on how you say that word. And what that means is that it means that you are attaching it to something else. That's what an affix is. So a prefix actually does a really good job of telling you where the information is attached just by looking at that PRE. And we're going to come back to this in just a second. Now, a prefix is a group of letters. Oops, I see that says words there. It is a group of letters that is added to the beginning of a word. And this is our definition here for prefix, a group of letters added to the beginning of the word. So we want to go ahead and make sure we're adding this to our vocabulary tracker. So prefixes come at the beginning. Now I want you to think of other words that you know that have pre inside of them. They all share something in common. That prefix here, PRE, actually means before. So it's a good way to help us remember where these go. Prefixes belong before the base word, before the root word. Now, the other thing we want to remember about prefixes is that these change the way that we understand a word. What that means is that word meaning changes. If I add something to the beginning, it changes what that word means. So let's look at an example. A really common prefix that we use a lot is the prefix un or un, which means not. So I've got two sentences here. That movie made me so happy. And that movie made me so unhappy. Let's think for a second. How does that prefix change the word? Well, I know that when I feel happy, I feel joyful, I feel just really excited and loving about the things that I'm looking at. So when a movie makes me happy, it means that I feel that happiness. But when I add un to happy, I all of a sudden now I don't feel that. I feel the opposite of that feeling. I feel not happy. So another way to say that is sad. So when we add these prefixes to the word, they completely change the way that we understand that word meaning. And this is really key for us when we are looking at how we build these words. We have to understand that when we build pieces or when we add pieces, the words change. So let's look at some common prefixes and see what other words you know. Now, I really recommend that on your notes sheet, wherever you are taking notes, I really recommend that you write down your list of prefixes here over to the left, and your second column, your list of meanings. These are the most common prefixes that we should know. So these are things that we have to commit them to memory. So what I've got is the prefix itself, what that prefix means, an example of the prefix, and then I want you to take some time and think about other words that you know. So before I go ahead and give you some more examples, I want you to go ahead and pause the video here and think about what other words you know that have these prefixes. So we're going to go ahead and look at these together. So the first thing that I want to draw your attention to is that some of these have the same meaning or similar meanings. So 4 of these prefixes mean similar things. So un, im or in, dis, and miss all have to do with this idea of not or wrong or the opposite. What we want to keep in mind is that not every one of these prefixes fits with every single word. Some of them will only fit with certain words. So we're going to look through these and see how that actually works. So my first prefix that we're going to look at is un, which means not or the opposite of something. So we have words like unusual, which means not usual. I look here and I see that usual is my root word because I've attached un to it. I also see the word untie. Well, I see tie is my root word and un is my prefix. So it literally means the opposite of tied. What other words do you know that include un? So a couple that stand out to me are words like unclear. We know clear means that it's easy to see or easy to understand. So when I add un to it, it means the opposite of that. I might also be able to use a word like, let's see. I could use maybe unable. I am not able to do something. We have that prefix un and our root word able. Our second prefix is re. Re means again, to do something again. So when we look at our example, we have the word rewrite. Rewrite is our word. Well, I know write is my base or root word. That's the word that has meaning. When I attach re to it, means I'm doing it again. I am going to rewrite something. So re is actually a really common prefix for things that have to do with learning because we know that the more we do something, the easier something gets. So we can use a word like reread, meaning to read again, or redo, meaning to do something again. So this is actually one of our most common education words, our education prefixes. I am and in both mean not. So we have words like impossible and inactive. Impossible meaning not possible, and inactive meaning not active. So we could also use words like incorrect. Something is not correct. I might use that I am. I could say maybe something like immature. That is not mature. Our next prefix is dis or dis. Just like un, this means not or the opposite of. So we can say disagree, literally means to not agree, and disconnect means the opposite of connecting. So what other kinds of dis words can we think of? Maybe something like disappear, meaning to not appear. We also have the prefix mis or miss. Miss means wrongly. So our example here is misread. So to read something wrongly or incorrectly means that you have misread it. We might also say that you can misunderstand. You have understood, but wrongly or incorrectly. We might also use the word misuse. You've used something, but you've used it wrongly, used it incorrectly. Pre, we see lots of words that have pre in them. Pre means before. So a good example here is preheat. You are going to heat something before you actually do it. We could say preview is another good word. You are going to view something before something else. That's a great one there, is preview. Over is our next prefix. Over means too much. Now we know over is a word all on its own, but when you attach it to the beginning of other words, it becomes a prefix. So we have something like overdue, means to do something too many times. Maybe I could say that I have overused something. I have used something too many times. Another good example would be to overcook. You have cooked something too much. Our next prefix is semi, S-E-M-I, which means half. So when I look at a word like semicircle, well, I know a circle is a whole thing, but if I have a semicircle, it tells me I have half of a circle. So this is a good one for math. I might also say that something is semi-dry. It is dried, but only halfway. And our last common prefix that we need to know is under. Now, just like over, it is a word all by itself, but when you attach it to something else, to another word, it becomes a prefix. So under means beneath or to have something that is less than. So my two words that are my examples here are underground, which literally means beneath the ground, or undercook, which literally means to cook something less than it needs to be done. I might also be able to say something like, I need to undercook my steak so that it finishes in the oven. I need to cook it less than it needs to be done. We could also use a word like underwater. It is below the water. Oh boy. Let's try to make sure we are spelling water correctly there. I got a little ahead of myself. Underwater. All right. So now that we've had a good chance to look at our prefixes, let's go ahead and move on to our next set of word parts, and those are going to be our suffixes. So when we talk about a suffix, this is another kind of affix, and if prefixes go at the beginning, what we want to say is that a suffix is a letter or group of letters that is added to the end of a word. So prefixes go at the beginning, and suffixes go at the end. So this is where we want to, again, add this into our vocabulary tracker, the definition of what a suffix is. Now we do want to be a little bit careful with suffixes because not all suffixes change the meaning of a word. So a good way to think about this is with verbs. Some suffixes do not get changed. They do not change the meaning of a word with verbs. And a good way to think about this is with an ed ending. ed can be added to a word, but it doesn't change the meaning of the word just when you do it. So for example, when I say I listen to the radio each day versus I listened to the radio each day, listen is my root word. I'm not changing anything. And the action itself doesn't change. I'm just changing when I do it. Now, this is completely different from when we talk about a prefix, because when we add prefixes to something, it changes the whole word meaning. So sometimes a suffix does not change the meaning, but other times it does. So for example here, one of our most common suffixes is full, F-U-L, which means to be full of something. So when I look at the sentence, please help me with the dishes, help has meaning all on its own. But if I say the next sentence, thank you for being so helpful, I don't mean that you are showing help. I mean that you are full of help. So that word changes completely. The suffix changes that word completely. So we want to just keep this in mind. Today we're going to be working with the suffixes that actually do change the meaning of a word. So let's go ahead and take a look at those. So these are our most common suffixes, and just like with the prefixes, make sure you pause here and see if you can come up with other words that you know that use these suffixes. So we're going to start with en. En means to make, cause, or become. So the example that we have is weaken. Weak is our root word. So when we say that, we say weaken literally means to become weak or to cause someone to be weak. Another good example we could say is to lengthen something or to lighten something. Lengthen means that it is becoming longer, and lighten means that something is becoming lighter. So en just means it's the process of making or becoming. Er and or always talk about a person who does something, like teacher or actor. So what we want to keep in mind here is that not all jobs fit into this category. Teach and act are your root words. They stand on their own. And when we add the er ending, what we notice is that it talks about a person who does this thing now. So another good example might be a baker. It is a person who bakes. An example of something that doesn't work this way is something like an accountant. Now, an accountant does have a root word, it has account, but it doesn't have that suffix to show me that it is a person who does something. So not every job works this way, just some of them do. Our next suffix is able, able, or ible, ible, which means you are tending to be or able to be. Some of my good examples here are likable, which means that you have a tendency to be liked, or collapsible, meaning that something is able to be collapsed. Now, I do want to take a minute here and talk about some spelling rules. So if we look at baker and collapsible here, what we notice is that some things have changed. Collapsible has the root word collapse, which ends with an E. But if we notice, when we add on the suffix here, the E disappears. The same thing with baker. The root word of baker is bake, but in order to make it baker, what we needed to do was drop the E before we add the ending. So when words end in E, just be a little bit more cautious with your spelling with that. Our next suffix is less. Now, less means without. So we might be able to use a word like powerless, which means without power. What other words could we use that have less inside of them? Maybe something like flawless, meaning that you are without flaws. Our next suffix is ment, which talks about the action or process of doing something or the state or quality of something. So two good examples here are government, which means the process of governing, and enjoyment, which means the state of enjoying something. We might also talk about a word like treatment. Treatment is the process of treating something. All right, next we see the one that we talked about from our previous slide, FUL. FUL, full, means to be full of something. So helpful means to be full of help. We might also use a word like joyful, meaning to be full of joy. Next, we see TY or ITY, which means the state of or quality of. So what we're noticing here is that this is very similar to MENT. But what I want you to pay attention to is that you cannot really mix and match your base words here. I can't really say enjoyity. It's not a word, it doesn't make sense. So this is not something that we would be able to do. In the same way that I would not be able to say loyalment, MENT. Those don't mix and match. So not every base word will match with every suffix. So my examples here were loyalty, which means the state of being loyal, or activity, which is the quality of being active. Okay, and our last suffix is ATION or ation, which means the act or process of something. And again, this one is very similar to our MENT with a process. So celebration literally means the act of celebrating something. But we couldn't say governation. It doesn't really work that way. Those words cannot be mixed and matched. So even though we have suffixes that have similar meaning, we can't mix and match the words that go with them. All right, so last thing that I want to do before I send you all on your way today to finish your homework is to do a couple of practices. So these are going to be very similar to the practices that you're going to see on Google Classroom. So we want to know, what is the meaning of the underlined word? All right, so our first example here is this sentence. After the accident, I had to relearn how to ride a bicycle. So the word we're looking at here is relearn. So first thing we want to do is separate it into its pieces. What is the root word here? Well, my root word here is learn, which means that the piece I added to it was relearn. Well, I know learn has meaning all by itself, but so does re. We said RE means again. So to relearn something, it does not mean to not learn. It does not mean to learn before, and it does not mean to wrongly learn. It means to learn again. The prefix re, we said, means again. So relearn means reading again, learning again. All right, let's look at our second example. This shirt is washable in warm water. So just like with our first word, we want to break it down into its base word and its suffix or prefix. So washable has a root word, a base word of wash. And I see that I'm adding the suffix able. So I'm going to think, okay, what does able mean? Is it a person who washes? Does it mean able to be washed? Is it the act of washing or the state of being washed? Well, I know that able means able to be washed. So I'm going to go ahead and choose B. The suffix able means able to be. So washable means able to be washed. All right, nicely done, everyone. So what I want you to keep in mind is that the work that we're doing this week is meant to be a little bit on the easier side. So the homework you're going to see on Google Classroom are not really hard words. I want you to get comfortable using this process before we start jumping into those hard words. If you need to, make sure that you watch this video again to be able to write down all of those prefixes and suffixes. You need to know what those mean. I'm also going to be posting the slides that you see here on Google Classroom so that you will have them to look at while you do your homework. As always, if you need any help with anything, if you need help with homework, or if you need help with any of the lessons that you are looking at, feel free to call me, email me, remind message me, text message me. You know you can get a hold of me any way you need to. All right, everyone, I'll see you next time. Bye.